Hello, my fellow Tarnished. Today we'll be discussing the Erd Tree and the Crucible, and how they relate to each other, and the Elden Ring. Now, on the first note, what I'm going to talk about is the misconceptions about these topics that have been surfacing lately. About the Erd Tree being a parasite. I think Vatividia is to blame for that. No real offense to the guy, but I think he jumped the gun and he underestimates his influence when it comes to lore and how people perceive lore. Now, I hope this video helps to those who are misguided or just don't have enough information and want to learn more. Now, on that note, we should start. Now, we'll start talking about the Crucible. First, we'll see what the Crucible is. For that, we have to read the Crucible Knight Gauntlet description. The primordial form of the Erd Tree, as you see, it says right there, Crucible of Life, the primordial form of the Erd Tree, meaning the Crucible transformed into the Erd Tree. Now, when one thing is a form of another thing, it means that they're the same thing, but it slowly transformed into a different thing. For example, when you were a baby, you transformed into an adult. It doesn't mean that baby isn't you, but that baby is also different from you. That is how the Crucible and the Erd Tree relate to each other. Now we have to learn what the Crucible does and what role it has. From the aspects of the Crucible Horns incantation, we can read, this is a manifestation of the Erd Tree's vital energies, an aspect of the primordial Crucible where all life was once blended together. As you can read from here, all life was blended together in the Crucible, meaning the Crucible is the origin of life. And also, it's an Erd Tree incantation, one of the ancient Erd Tree incantations. This will be important later when we read a description of another item. But as you see, there was nothing before the Crucible or the Elden Ring in the world because there was no life. Now, how did the Crucible come to be, and how does it exist, and what was the cause of it? Now, for that, we need to read the Elden Star's item description. It is said, long ago, the Greater Will sent a star bearing a beast into the lands between, which would later become the Elden Ring. Now, we learn really where the Elden Ring comes from, but we also can read something very important from this item description. This legendary incantation is the most ancient of those that derive from the Erd Tree. But wait, you ask, doesn't the Crucible also relate to the Erd Tree? As you see, one of the ancient Erd Tree incantations, if this is older than the Crucible incantation, it means the Elden Ring predates the Crucible and also relates to the Erd Tree, meaning that the Elden Ring and the Elden Beast are the cause of the Crucible, meaning they caused all life in the lands between. But there is one wrench in this perfect cog of reasoning we just established, and it is quite troublesome. It is in the description of root resin. The roots of the great tree were once linked to those of the Erd Tree, so they say, and it is for this reason catacombs are built around great tree roots. Now, you ask yourself, what is this? And how does it actually relate to anything I just said? What is the great tree? Where did it come from? What does it mean? Now, our friend Vati over here came up with a theory that the Erd Tree came from the cosmos and completely parasiticized the Great Tree, which came from the Crucible. But I have actually found a way to remove this wrench so we can continue with our discussion of the Erd Tree and the Crucible and the Elden Ring. I found out that it's actually a mistranslation, and our good friends over at Reddit have actually figured it out. I'll link the whole of it in the description below, but as you can read here, actually the Great Tree means great roots, was mistranslated because it's actually from ancient Japanese and doesn't actually translate well to English. So we can move on knowing the Great Tree doesn't exist, and this root resin actually relates to the Erd Tree being separated from its roots because of the shattering. Now, we should take a big long look at the Elden Ring and how it works. It is completely tied to the Erd Tree. It's actually the Erd Tree's cause and the Crucible's cause. So, if the Elden Ring is affected, so is the Crucible and the Erd Tree. As we can see from the Mending Runes, the Mending Rune actually surrounds the Elden Ring, and this affects the Elden Ring. For example, if we use different runes, it actually makes the Erd Tree look different. If we look at the Age of the Duskborn ending Erd Tree, it looks gray, silvery, completely transformed because we changed the Elden Ring, and so it affected the Erd Tree. Now let's look at the Dung Eater ending. The same thing. We used the Dung Eater Mending Rune, and so the world became the way it is, and the Erd Tree changed. Now, this is also what Radagon did, and what the Golden Order have done. The Golden Order, which we'll talk about later, did something, but we can also see Radagon's rune. As you can see, those interlapping lines behind the Elden Ring is actually Radagon's rune of order, as you can see from his seal. This is his seal, and as you can see, the same patterns appear on the Elden Ring. Just like the Mending Rune, we apply to it at the end of the game. Now, we have to talk about the Golden Order and its creation and how it relates to all of this. Enya over here tells us that the Golden Order began by removing destined death from the Elden Ring. And this would have changed the tree, and it would later become the Erd Tree. As you can see, this is the Golden Order seal, and we should read the Gilded Great Shield. Item description: the red tinge in the gold coat mirrors the primordial matter that became the Erd Tree. As you can see, mirrors the primordial matter that became the Erd Tree, meaning the Crucible itself, before becoming the Erd Tree, was actually red. But where can we see this occurring, and when did this actually happen? For this, we need to read the description of the Dragon Lord. The Dragon Lord, whose seat lies at the heart of the storm beyond time, is said to have been the Elden Lord in the age before the Erd Tree. His god fled. The Lord continued to await its return. Now, this is an interesting development. As you can see, this dragon was the Elden Lord. And what is the Elden Lord? The Elden Lord is the person who brandishes the Elden Ring and becomes the consort to the god who actually houses the Elden Ring. But as you can read, it was an age before the Erd Tree. Now, how can this be if the Crucible and the Erd Tree are the same? How can there be an age before the Erd Tree? Because there was nothing alive before the Crucible. The Crucible jump-started all life. I'll say to you that the Crucible and the Erd Tree are different, because the Erd Tree was actually created by removing destined death. As you can see, the red tinge that became the Erd Tree, and the Erd Tree is now gold. And this is how it works, because before Marika and the Golden Order, technically there was no Erd Tree, there was only the Crucible. The Crucible had a red tinge, and now, because of the removal of the Rune of Destined Death, it means that it turned gold. Now, how can we see this occurring? We can see this firstly occurring in lightning. Modern lightning spells actually have a golden tinge and a golden color. All of them, actually. Every single modern lightning spell has a golden color. What about ancient dragon lightning spells? Ancient also relating to the Crucible. Ancient like the Crucible actually has a red tinge. Now, not only can we see this from the incantations of lightning, but we can also see this in the flora. For example, the flora in Altus Plateau is overtly gold, completely covered in gold. But now, what happens to the flora in ancient Faram Azula? You guessed it, the foliage in Faram Azula is actually completely red, meaning the Crucible, before the destined death was removed, the Crucible was active, and after the removal of destined death, the Erd Tree was born. Now, we have to figure out why the Crucible and the Erd Tree seem to be at odds with each other. Well, that is not a simple question to answer, but hear me out. We have to read this feather talisman, a vestige of the Crucible of primordial life, born partially of devolution, was considered a signifier of divine in ancient times, but is now increasingly disdained as an impurity as civilization has advanced. As you can see, everything relating to the Crucible in the modern age of the Erd Tree is disdained, even though technically the Erd Tree and the Crucible are the same thing. Now, we can also read the law of regression. You can read this yourselves, but I'll explain essentially what it means. Everything regresses. For example, we can see this occurring in the nobles that wander the land. We can also see beastmen regress, and as time goes on in the Golden Order, things regress into a more streamlined and advanced and intelligent way, meaning as time goes on, the strong may turn weak, but they also turn more advanced and nuanced. And now, the seedbed curse, to confirm that everything relating to the Crucible is rejected by the Erd Tree, even though we learn they're technically the same thing, and I'll explain why it is technically just rejected. I don't know why I said technically, but just roll with it. Now, we can see from this item description the curse of the omen actually prevents you from returning to the Earth Tree, and we also know that the omen and their horns relate to the Earth Tree. For example, Morgoth is an omen and has a tail and horns, and we know horns and a tail is directly related to the Crucible and is an aspect of the Crucible. Now, why is this? Well, this is because the Golden Order actually applied a mending rune to the Elden Ring. We can actually see this mending rune applied to the Elden Ring, and it's actually Radagon's seal, meaning even though the Crucible and the Erd Tree are the same thing, because the Elden Ring is connected to the Erd Tree, if the Elden Ring is changed to fit the Golden Order, it means the Erd Tree will act upon how the Elden Ring has been changed, as we can see from the different endings when we apply the mending rune. Meaning, it's not because the Greater Will or the Earth Tree itself hates the omen or rejects them. It's because the Golden Order and Radagon don't like the Crucible, and so when they changed the Elden Ring, this was included, and so even though technically they're blessed by the Earth Tree and the Crucible, because of the removal of Destined to Death and the adding of a mending rune, those blessed by the Crucible are rejected by the Earth Tree, because the Earth Tree now adheres to the newly changed Elden Ring. So, because of this, I think all of the misconceptions about the Greater Will, the Earth Tree, and the Crucible are cleared up, and no one has to talk about them again. Because I think this is pretty conclusive and there's no more evidence to be explored. I hope you enjoyed the video. I had fun making it. I had to research a lot, and I had to make a lot of correlations. And Elden Ring lore is actually pretty confusing, so I can understand why people would confuse it. So I hope you have a safe journey in the land between. And tally ho.